Okay, shh. Listen to this. This is the tape I found downstairs.
This is Professor Raymond Noble, Department of Ancient History, log entry number 2. I believe I have made a significant find.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
Don't you blame the movies! Movies don't create psychos! Movies make psychos more creative!
We have such sights to show you.
Join us! Join us! Who's laughing now? I'm gonna hurt you. You didn't have to punch me, see? I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to SplatterCast. I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And yes, as you can see, things are looking a little different on the old SplatterCast here. We have updated some stuff. Yes, we are coming into 2023. We had talked about it for a little while, how we wanted to make sure that we were, kind of moving away from the standard format we had before, where we were using clips and things like that as the visuals, because every single one of these gets flagged with a copyright on YouTube.
Oh, so, it does.
Yeah,
fun times.
So we had to kind of step away from that. So your boy here, I'll take all the credit, worked his ass off over the last week or two here to kind of really hash out some of these new flashy intros and little segment cards, whatever you want to call them. Either way, it's going to be a whole new show here. And we've changed a couple of segments. You'll see as we go along, if you're a longtime viewer or if you're just discovering us for the first time, a couple of these are different. But we still do have a couple of the classics, some of the ones you guys are all used to. Still the same basic formula. We just did a couple name changes. That's all. So nothing too crazy, just a fresh coat of paint, I should say.
It's all a basic formula. A little rebranding here, a little bringing us into 2023, I guess. And I think it's a lot of fun. Dylan did some good work. I mean, we don't want to pat him on the back too much, but it is some pretty nice stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate it immensely. And so we also are, again, if you didn't catch Cape Fear, the little note at the end there, we did say that we were moving this to a monthly endeavor. So SplatterCast, kind of the channel's main show here, will be once a month from now on, which means the shows are going to be hopefully bigger. We get a little bit more time to go a little deeper. And also, if you keep up with the channel and you just like our other content as well, we're giving you a lot more of that as well here, because, we enjoy doing this podcast quite a bit. Bi-weekly was a lot of fun while we had it, but it was one of those things where, with kind of how the flow and structure was going and just the year we had with all the new release horror movies and all the coverage there, it was just one of those things where we thought we're not really giving the best attention, I would say, to some of these films as we'd like to. So why don't we take a step back, take a little pressure off our shoulders and, deliver one solid show a month, and then just fill the channel with all of our other content, like Primetime Terrors, video essays, obviously current movie reviews, and so much more coming along the way. Yeah,
because when we got into this, it was like, bi-weekly seems pretty good. And then as we started adding things, things keep coming up, reviews, we kept coming up with different ideas, a lot of ideas we didn't even get a chance to get to in 2022, that we really want to kind of stretch our legs and breathe a little bit and diversify the channel a little bit more. And I tell you, those 2 weeks come up quick in terms of trying to prep for a film and get as much information as you can and make that specific show as unique as possible. So it's like, we'll just narrow it down to once a month and really do our due diligence and get a lot of background and everything. And, limiting it to one a month also make sure that, we pick out the best films that we want to, and we're not just kind of, running and gunning and just adding the film for the sake of this. That's obviously Dylan's favorite film here is The Thing.
Yes, so why don't we dive into it? Yes, this is you pointed out, actually, I think we should mention it right before we hit the record button. This was not planned, but this is releasing on John Carpenter's birthday. So happy birthday to, in probably, I'd say both our opinions, the greatest horror filmmaker of all time.
I would say that
And
is very accurate.
yeah, and one of just the greatest filmmakers of all time. So, sir, happy birthday. Thank you so much for everything that you've produced. We are sorry that Hollywood treated you so poorly, and I really, really hope that you get to make one more movie, before you completely leave us, not to be morbid. But,
Starting off on a depressing note, are we?
he's been, well, there's a little bit of nihilism in this film, so I think it's only appropriate. But it is one of those things where it's like he has been dancing around a lot lately. I think since the reinvigoration of the Halloween stuff, that he would like to maybe come back and give something a shot. I know something I was going to kind of save for a little bit later into the show, because the only segment that hasn't been revamped as far as like a cue card thing goes is They Live. So it's like one of those things where I'm still working on that. But again, we only use that very sparingly.
Yeah.
Is that Blumhouse has been kind of talking about, or at least it was announced, that they're doing an adaptation of Frozen Hell, which is not the kind of the unabridged version of Who Goes There. So it's the original story that Campbell wrote, John W. Campbell. So it's one of those things where they're doing an adaptation of that, and I believe Carpenter is a producer on that. So a lot of people were kind of speculating maybe he would step back behind the camera for that. We don't know anything else about it.
Yeah.
But
And obviously us sitting here in the year that we had in unique horror with 2022, and then Halloween back in theaters, and John Carpenter kind of getting back in the swing of things. I mean, looking at where horror was at the time of The Thing here and what this was labeled as opposed to kind of the love that horror has been getting as of recent, I could definitely see that spark kind of being reignited for him and trying his hand at something different, especially when you look at something like Blumhouse, where they let a lot of those directors have their unique voices, or something like A24 that is not afraid to step outside of the box and, let someone tell their own story. So I think now more than ever is certainly there is a place for John Carpenter to do something. And I mean, how many directors out there to speak so highly of him, and how much of an influence has he had for the directors that are out there now that have, grown up in the 80s and with so many of these iconic films that, when you talk to a director, they're talking about their favorite films. They're going to mention at least one John Carpenter film.
yeah, and it's so synonymous with anybody in the horror genre. Not everybody, but I think most people, I would agree with that statement, Luke, that they do take some kind of an influence or will mention him in some capacity as being kind of a driving factor for their love of, horror cinema. And that all starts with, obviously, the one he's probably most known for, Halloween. We've talked about it a lot on here. We have a video on the channel, not a full podcast. We'll get there at some point. But we did talk about it, for I think about 40 minutes, 50 minutes.
I think so. Yeah.
It was a longer video, but I mean, we could talk about that film for hours. And, then he's got things like your favorite Carpenter film, They Live, which, goes into a little bit more of that sci-fi horror, a little bit more dystopian. And then, of course, we kind of moved down the rabbit hole a little bit with something before Halloween was Assault on Precinct 13, which isn't necessarily horror, but it definitely, you can see that influence coming in there with it just being more of a thrilling situation.
Yeah, and that's where it's like you look at all these films, and even like They Live, and where that's more science fiction than anything. You can look at these, and not necessarily just horror directors. I feel like, and so many people can pick out great themes from just the storytelling from John Carpenter and be inspired by what he was able to create. Because it's like you can look at, if you watch all of John Carpenter's filmography, and yeah, maybe some things don't hit with you, but I think there's going to at least be some sort of storytelling, some sort of theme, or just the visual presence that he brings on screen there. I think that something is going to resonate with a filmmaker to be like, I can see why this guy is talked about and spoke about so highly in Hollywood, in a lot of these newer kind of directors and creators here, because he is just such a source of inspiration for so many people.
Yeah, and it is just kind of the point I was trying to illustrate there was just the broad scope that he was able to bring. I mean, you look at this film and you look at something like Big Trouble in Little China, and they are completely different in tone, but there is an odd consistency to it
Yeah.
as well. You can tell when it's a Carpenter film, and it's not just from the credit font that he uses, because I do love that consistency of like it's almost like a little signature
Mhm.
on every one of his movies. Because back when the pandemic quarantine was going on, I was watching a ton of horror. I think this is right when we started doing episodes for the original incarnation of Splattercast, and I think I watched. I started going through his entire filmography.
Yeah.
So like I think I got everything up to In the Mouth of Madness. And then after I watched that one, I started going back to work and everything. So like I was just diving deep on him. And it's just such a journey, such a refreshing, wonderful journey to go through his filmography because everything is so different. Everything really feels unique. But again, there is still that familiarity of just like this is a John Carpenter film. I'm being told a story by him or taken on a journey by him, and it all just feels so good. Like this is very much like this gives me the sensation his films of like a warm cup of hot cocoa on a cold January day kind of thing.
Absolutely. It's like you can, if you wake up at 8 in the morning and flip on the first John Carpenter film and spend your entire day watching John Carpenter movies, it's like that's a day where you're just going to be sparked with so much creativity because of so many unique stories that he's able to bring and a unique flair that it's like, you look at Halloween, you look at Big Trouble in Little China, you look at They Live, all different, but all great in their own way. So it's like you don't really have a lot of filmmakers that can be that diverse and bring something so different to each different film and have them resonate with so many different people. So it's like you just don't really get that. So like John Carpenter was unique for his time. I mean, John Carpenter in the 80s, there's nothing like it. There was just one hit after another after another. And again, that's where it's like you can sit down and just turn on all his films one after the other and just have a great time.
Yeah, and when you get him with a good writer or somebody that he can collaborate with really well, even down to his actors, like Keith David was somebody he worked with multiple times. This is their first collaboration in the film we're talking about today. Kurt Russell, it's one of those things where it's like with a film we did cover in 2022. One of the last ones that Luke picked was Christine.
Hmm.
And we had a lot to say about him obviously there, but the melding of him and Stephen King, we talk about just how wonderful and unique and what a perfect blend that was. And I think that was like the bulk of our conversation when we talked about Carpenter, but it still like remains the same here. Like we need to admire it and just like mention it because he works so well with these complementing characters, like these actors he uses and the people that he just chooses to work with. Because that's the thing, a lot of his early work, and especially leading up into the film we're talking about today, he used a lot of the same people as far as behind the scenes and everything goes. And everybody has nothing but nice things to say about the guy and just how he was a driven filmmaker, but also at the same time he let creativity flow on set and things
Yeah.
like that. And he was never, really looked at as like a hard ass or somebody like I love James Cameron, but in his heyday, there was a lot of people who said that, he could be very strict and, very rough when he ran his ship. So it's like, you don't hear that with Carpenter. You hear
Yeah.
that he's a very fair and very creatively in tune person.
Yeah, you can tell John Carpenter when you speak to him, when you ever listen to an interview from him. He looks at a film as a collaboration. Yes, he's a director and kind of has that vision, but he listens to so many different voices on set. I mean, like looking at Christine, you can tell that he had looked at that film and the camaraderie that is on that film, and just the playfulness that once they share stories, you can tell that it was fun going to work. It wasn't. He wasn't a hard ass on set. He was willing to kind of listen and, if someone had an idea, to kind of bring it to the forefront and see if it would be able to translate on film. And as you're talking about, like him and Stephen King, it's like how many different Stephen King films going from book to film did not really translate. And I think you need someone like a John Carpenter that is able to bring that unique voice and eye, and pick out kind of great things that Stephen King has on the page and bring it to the actual film itself. So it's like John Carpenter again is one of those unique directors that I think is able to pick out those fun themes especially in already source material, and be able to latch onto those and kind of emphasize those on screen.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And, we could talk about Carpenter all day. I definitely think that there is a series of videos that we have been discussing for some time that will definitely give us that opportunity to even just dive a little deeper into the man himself and his history and the filmography. But we are here to talk about The Thing. And like Luke said, this is my favorite horror film of all time. I mean, if you've been following us for a little bit, you know that I have a ton of Thing stuff in my background. Some of the stuff you see today isn't always represented, but it's one of those things where I wanted to show up for this. It's again, when it's her favorite, you got to represent. There is a piece I do want to show that Luke got me a couple birthdays ago, that is usually covered behind my head, but it is very cool. You can see it right there.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's fan art, or was it it was from the storyboard? I mean, like, I know it's part of the storyboard, but I believe it was
it was made by a Canadian artist.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting his name. His name is escaping
it's
me
on
right
the
now.
back.
Yeah, he actually signed it and everything. So yeah, it was made by a Canadian artist, hand drawn and everything. So Dylan's birthday was coming up, and I was like, I have to do some searching for The Thing memorabilia. So I was able to contact him and get a nice little thing for Dylan there. And I can't remember, did I frame it or did you frame it? I forgot.
You actually gave it to me in the plastic.
Okay.
That it came in. I think you got that done. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like I've just kept it in that.
Okay, perfect.
Because I want to get an official frame for it, but it's been protected in there and it looks nice and everything. So I just kept it in that. So that's what it's hanging up there with some command strips right now. And I kind of, it's perfect because I just saved it for, obviously I wanted to display all my horror stuff, and well, we rebooted this, so it works out.
There it is.
But this was a film that I remember seeing fondly for the very first time. So watching Die Hard 3 on that Fox movie network that I always bring up. It was a Friday night. Don't know what time of year it was. I think it might have been summer or early fall. But I watched Die Hard 3 with a vengeance. I love the Die Hard movies. And then this came on after. And my dad was like, oh, this movie's great. You'll love it. We could watch it. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll check it out. He's like, got a lot of cool monsters in it. And, that sold little, I think maybe I was 7 or 8 years old. That sold me. So I ended up staying up the entire night. My dad passed out. He fell asleep on the couch. And I was just sleeping. I used to make little forts and beds with blankets and pillows out there just to have like a sleepover, kind of like camping thing. So I was just laying on the ground, just absorbed in this movie, just watching it and just like so taken aback by everything. There was a lot of science jargon and everything that went over my head, but just the creatures these people were turning into really just sucked me in. And I loved it. And that was the last I had seen it, other than maybe catching a couple pieces here and there on TV until before I got hired at the media store that we worked at. I was a patron. So I went in there and I bought like a big stack of movies, which was shortly after the location had opened. And one of those movies was The Thing on Blu-ray, just the standard Blu-ray. I don't think the Scream Factory one was even out yet. And I revisited it. And that's when I was like, oh man, this is really solid. Like kind of really took in the characters and the situation. And then I just started looking into the movie and then looking more into John Carpenter himself. Like, obviously I knew him from like Halloween by this point, but like really diving deep into his filmography a little bit. And then as time has gone on, it's just one of those things where I want to say probably by the time I was about to graduate high school, it just really cemented for me that this was my favorite horror film of all time.
And for me, like I was trying to think back as to when I had first seen the thing, and unfortunately, I do not remember it. I This was just one of those films again where it appears on AMC. It was ingrained in the DNA of my childhood, where it was always on rotation. It was like Predator, this would just be on television. I do think that me being such a big fan of Halloween in the slashers in general, as soon as I would hear anything about John Carpenter being that same director, even though being a little kid, it was just like, oh, it's by the same guy. So like in my head, I would think all these films are somehow related. So like, this one I just grew up on. It was always on. It was something that, it has that aesthetic, that 80s aesthetic that it's like comfort food to me. Even going back on this watch and just watching it, the opening credits, everything is just, it reeks of 80s, so it's always just my childhood right there. So I just know I've seen this an unlimited amount of times, and especially in bits and pieces. As I got older, I was like one of those films that I had to sit down and actually watch, and I do believe that was on AMC as well. And gave it that full watch, because this was something that, again, always on TV, playing with action figures, and it was on TV, and you catch like a half hour, and then as being a kid, you get up and go do something else, and then
Yeah.
a week later you catch another half hour of it. So this was just one that was always on television, so I grew up with Kurt Russell with a beard.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, Kurt Russell was definitely a staple in my home as well. So it's one of those things where I agree. I think after I saw it the first time, it definitely, especially around Halloween, AMC Fear Fest, baby, like
Yep.
they'd have this thing on in rotation with like Halloween and all that. So I definitely caught it a couple times that way. And again, yeah, I was an action figure kid myself, clearly. So it's one of those things where it's like, I would always be playing with my action figures and watching horror movies or,
There's something
action movies.
There's something about playing with action figures and watching a good monster movie that you just can't beat.
Oh yeah. I mean, even an action movie, like,
Yeah.
watching Die Hard and playing with, Jedi and all kinds of stuff. Like, it's wild. Like I guess that's why that's a part of my life that never fully went away. Not necessarily that I get enough time to sit down and play with my action figures as much, but like, I still like to pose them, obviously, and, get them out of their packaging and mess with them a little bit and stuff like that when they're there. I don't really make the storylines like I used to, because that was my thing. I was always really making storylines and doing my thing with them, but I still appreciate them. I still appreciate my little plastic men. So, yeah, and they have NECA and Hasbro. They've gotten way too much of my money over the years. So, yeah, that's where I sit with action figures. But yes, that is
It's a
that is one of
nostalgia.
yes, and that is one of the, you're right, one of the most pure forms of just, I think, childhood that I can really pinpoint to. Yeah, and I love it. And that's the thing. Like, talking about this movie to me is, again, it's my favorite. It's one of those things where it's like this, just everything. I get so happy and so warm when I talk about this movie, which is kind of ironic considering it all takes place in Antarctica, and it's everybody's freezing to death basically. But it's just a magical film to me, man, and I can't wait to dive into it. So I guess without further ado, we should probably bust into our first segment here with the account of the macabre.
They could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare.
Yes, so this is the account of the macabre, where we like to go through, talk about the story, and just basically, a little bit of what was going on with this film, what actually happened in the presentation, and then, we saved kind of the behind the scenes and everything for a little later. But without further ado, I guess I'll read my little synopsis here. Again, I kind of gave up on trying to write these out because I just ended up on this one. I started writing it because I'm like, it's my favorite movie, I got to do it. And I was about 4 paragraphs deep and probably about halfway through the film, and I was like, I can't fucking read this on the thing. I'm just not good at summing things up. So for future reference, Luke is going to be writing all of this segment from here on out. He's going to write these out because he's so much better than me. But yeah, why don't we get into it? In remote Antarctica, a group of American research scientists are disturbed at their base camp by a helicopter shooting at a sled dog. When they take the dog in, it brutally attacks both human beings and canines in the camp, and they discover that the beast can assume the shape of its victims. A resourceful helicopter pilot, Kurt Russell, and the camp doctor, Richard Dursta? I don't know about that. Led the camp crew in a desperate, gory battle against the vicious creature before it picks them all off, one by one. I wanted to say Richard Dreyfuss there, so that's why I kind of fucked that up, because it's our Richard D. But yeah, it's a hell of a film.
Yeah.
And I don't think that necessarily does it justice, but it did kind of just sum everything up for me. It is one of those things where you get a lot out of this movie from repeat viewings. That's just where I want to kind of open it, because I think that watching this movie for the first time is exciting. It's interesting, and it really catches you with the flash of the effects and some of the standout scenes, like the blood test scene, and when the dogs turn and everything, or when the dog first turns. That's all visceral, incredible stuff. Wonderful storytelling, but it's like those repeat viewings of just kind of seeing the storytelling and how Carpenter used so many tricks to misdirect people and misdirect the audience, and really give you that sense of nobody here can be trusted.
Yeah.
And it's fucking great, because even to this day, I've seen this movie probably damn near 100 times. And I still go back and forth on, are they the thing now? Are they the thing here? Or did this happen then? One of the biggest ones for me, as far as like, the like ones I wasn't sure about for the longest time, but they kind of reveal it at the time that he wasn't, is always Clark. I'm always suspicious of Clark because he spends so much time with the dog, and I always wonder why he didn't get assimilated. And it's like, these are kind of questions I want to pose throughout. But Luke, I'll let you kind of have the floor here for a few minutes and just talk about the story of the thing.
Yeah, and as you read that synopsis, it is very broad. It's looking at so many different creature feature kind of films, and looking at The Thing. I think the Thing brings such a unique flavor to any of these kind of creature-esque films, and because there's a different voice here. It's something so different. Again, this is where I mentioned in our Halloween video, Blueprint. And this is, again, a very Blueprint in terms of like a creature feature, I think, because you want the audience to be on their toes so much. And just like looking at the opening here, it's like, I think on this viewing here, trying to really dissect this film and kind of trying to put myself, especially for the podcast here, what I found myself doing more so is on those viewings is trying to put myself in the audience's shoes, not as in me watching this and growing up with this film, but being in the theater that very first time and like looking at the opening of this film. It's as we talk about John Carpenter bringing such a unique flair to these films. I think he kind of, as an audience member, as a fan of his films, we can't help but try to solve the puzzle that he creates. But I don't necessarily know if he gives us all the pieces, and I don't think it's meant to be solved. And I think that's why John Carpenter has so many stories that are rich to be almost continued, because he specializes in just one instance. And like going into this as an audience member for the very first time, and it's a dog running through the snow with a couple of guys in a helicopter shooting at him. And it's like, what exactly is happening here? It's like just watching that go on. And then the helicopter landing, we see all the guys, Kurt Russell playing chess, and everyone living their life, and then we kind of this meeting of the Norwegians, and then the Americans here, and again, this kind of xenophobia of not understanding what they're saying, and the miscommunication, and not knowing why they're trying to shoot this dog, and the threat that is actually looming. What a unique instance they build right here. It's like, we don't even, as an audience member going into this film, you have no clue about the stakes that are going to be happening here, just a half hour later. And I think this is like the epitome of what John Carpenter is able to create, because this is something that is so different. And like you're saying, so many repeat viewings, and there's so many, people talk about social commentaries and what John Carpenter tried to connect here in terms of, social issues at the time, and into a creature feature like this. And it's very interesting, and that can be glossed over. And and I think that's totally fine, where it's like you can view this as face value, just as a thrill ride kind of film, because I think he specializes in that as well. But then he also adds that extra social commentary sometimes into his films. I mean, you look at They Live and things like that. So it's like, getting that extra John Carpenter flair. This is how you do a creature feature. And again, this is Blueprint.
Yeah, and you talk about kind of the extra kind of like messages within the film here. There's just the distrust, and what does it mean for humanity, or just a person in general, when you are stuck in a situation where it's not only just like you in a place like where you can't get to anybody, but it's legitimately in a place where who you're stuck with is who you're stuck with.
Yeah.
I mean, being in an Antarctic base and there is nobody for miles, and like it at one point, the helicopter goes out. It's like, how the hell are you getting out of there? It's your only way, if you can, because of the weather, God forbid, get out of here to any kind of civilization.
Yeah. And
so you are stuck with these people, and not just like, in the sense of, if you have any kind of issues with them or any beef with them, but like once this whole thing starts to go down, and now you can't trust the only people that you have, it's like it's the isolation, it's the psychological nature to this movie that also plays a huge effect on it.
Yeah, and again, this unique Carpenter flair, where you look at this film, and not previously, not that very long ago, before this film, another film that specializes in this kind of cabin fever aspect, that happens to be my favorite horror film, The Shining. And it's kind of, they both have those parallels, but you look at the tone of the thing, it's very different than The Shining, so it's like trying to be able to bring that kind of element to it, but add a little bit extra, I think is very, very unique, obviously, with John Carpenter. But like, looking at this film and subsequent viewings here, where we talk about kind of the social issues here, where I believe John Carpenter has mentioned that he kind of wanted to draw parallels to the kind of AIDS and everything going on there.
Yes.
And where how well this kind of film can be adapted throughout time, because you look at that in the early 80s, and we're kind of talking about AIDS, and that's more of an intimate kind of social issue, I would say, in terms of contracting certain things. But like, and then bringing it into a post-COVID world. I mean, we're still dealing with COVID, but like, having lived through the whole 2020 and everything, where it's like, that is not as intimate. That's kind of walking past someone and contracting COVID. So it's like, but they all have that paranoia, so it's like, this film, decade after decade after decade, can still be translated so well into the social issues that we're still dealing with today.
Absolutely. And I mean, like this, especially with quarantine, for a lot of people, you did see a lot of people talking about parallels to this.
Yeah.
The gift that I kept sending friends is actually one of my favorite quotes from this movie. It's when McCready is on his own and he's talking into a tape recorder, and he says, nobody trusts anybody now, and we're all very tired. And it's just one of those things where it's like, it really adds this human element after all this bombastic shit that you've seen into this movie, of just like him just sitting there with a drink, just talking to himself and just kind of documenting this to God knows who's going to find it, if they ever find it. And he's just kind of letting everybody know, like, where his headspace is. It's very human. And again, that goes to Carpenter, that goes to Kurt Russell as Reformer. But I mean, I also got to say, like, Bill Lancaster did a great job with his screenplay here.
Yeah.
Like all of these characters feel very human. And I mean, I think that goes hand in hand with not only the script and the screenplay, but also the actors too. But really, from a writing perspective, it's like, this is a very difficult scenario, I would think, to kind of try to write and mentally keep track of everything that you're setting up here. Because literally from scene one, soon as that dog makes contact with these characters, you can really look at it like this, that anything can happen. This character walks off with this dog for 5 seconds, 5 minutes, and they could be, infected, taken over, assimilated. It's like, it doesn't work out that way as you watch the film and you understand, but it is one of those things where it's like the tension is there. So it almost feels like this is kind of a movie that benefits from that second viewing, because now you know what the threat is and just how close everybody is to it and what it is, that when you watch it, it's almost terrifying to see this innocent little puppy just jumping up on them as these Norwegians show up with grenades and rifles, and they're just like, oh, we're gonna kill that fucking thing. You don't get it at first, but when you watch that on a second viewing, it's like, Jesus Christ, like, everything was right there. Like, if they just would have not intervened or something, like, there was a chance that it could have been revealed to them and they all could have taken it out right there, but no.
And
no, we wouldn't have a movie. But
I'm not mistaken in that Carpenter, in the screenplay, they actually had the Norwegians tell the Americans what exactly the situation was, but they just didn't understand what they were saying. Isn't that correct?
Yes. So nobody spoke their language. So they were literally telling them to stay away from it and everything, and that he's a monster and stuff like that. But they didn't get it. They didn't know.
And I think that's so interesting now in the age of the internet here, where it's, as soon as you watch that film in the theater and you look online, someone's going to translate that for you and tell you exactly everything. But, for American audiences at that time, that probably went overlooked for years and not really knowing what the Norwegians were saying. And I think that's such a fun little element there where, looking at this script here and the way that everything was filmed, everyone was so meticulous in the ideas and kind of how they were going to express them, through the lens. So, in that really shows, and I think that's why it's like you're saying, subsequent viewings of this, you get so much more out of it, and it's like knowing that threat and then kind of almost playing that game of like how you had said when you were curious as to how Clark was never assimilated, but it's like looking at when everyone, after you know who has been assimilated, and trying to piece together when exactly that happened. Because I think one of the things that works so well in here is a lot of things happen off screen, and we're kind of just brought back into the situation. And I think that that's one of the perfect ways to build tension, because sometimes, things can kind of get criticized a little bit for, oh, this happens off screen and they didn't show this. But it's like, I think that's the beauty of John Carpenter's The Thing, is it's so intentional that it adds all that tension, especially when you get to that blood test scene. It's like, it's this beautiful kind of build up. And that, again, looking at the timestamps here, that blood test scene, which is so iconic and builds so much up, doesn't happen till way later in the film.
Oh, yeah. And just to pull it up, the exact verbiage from the translation is get the hell out of there. It's not a dog. It's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog. It isn't real. So, it's one of those things, where it finally did get translated. And, that is just so ironic that it's like, if just one of them spoke Norwegian, they might have been able to avoid all of this,
Yep.
I still think that conflict would have went down a little bit, but maybe they would have been a little bit more suspicious. Going back to Clark, one of my favorite pieces of visual storytelling is, that dog making its way, or the thing making its way through the hallway out of the rec room, and then you see it just focused solo shots of the dog walking around the camp, getting an idea of the layout. I really look at that as you spending time with the creature, a lot like how we would spend time with Michael Myers when he's stalking. And he's just getting a layout of the camp, figuring out, where everybody is, where everything is, and when he is his best opportunity to strike. So it's one of those things where when you do get to that room and you see that shadow, I think one of the most beautiful genius tricks Carpenter ever played when it comes to filmmaking is everybody kind of assumes that that's Clark just by the way that the person looks, but it's nobody in the cast. It was a completely separate crew member. They just put him in there for the shadow because he didn't want it to be anybody from the cast. He didn't want there to be any inkling of who this person was because it's nameless, it's faceless. They wanted it to just be up for interpretation forever. And again, it's just that beauty of what Carpenter likes to do, where it's like he just trusts his audience. He doesn't think you're stupid. He's not going to hold your hand the entire time. He gives you relevant information when it's appropriate, like any good director will, but he's still going to say, this is up to interpretation. Now, I think that's Clark, but it could have been anybody else that we didn't see in the rec room. It honestly could have been any member of this camp, really.
Yeah.
So.
And that's where, going back to when we had opened up talking about John Carpenter, where we as fans, we want to solve the puzzle. And I don't think Carpenter ever gives us all the pieces to solve that puzzle, because this one, everyone will have their own take on who that is, and everyone's right. And also everyone's wrong, because it's like, it isn't meant to be solved. Again, looking at the ambiguity of this film and even the ending, where that is so discussed over the decades upon decades, and Keith David's been asked about it and everything, and it's like they don't even have the answers to any of this, because I don't think it's meant to be solved. It's meant, again, and that's the beauty of a lot of John Carpenter films, is it's just a moment, and it's an instance, and it's like where I talk about, I love when we end on horror. I think a lot of John Carpenter stuff ends on horror. It's not meant to have this perfect bow on it where we get these happy endings, and that's what I love about these films, and especially The Thing here, where it's like even as everything closes down, in the beat goes, and it's like, oh well, that threat is still out there, I feel. So all this stuff where it's a paranoia, even as an audience member. Again, going back just to that shadow, it's like it could be this person, but maybe it's this, and so it's like you're always kind of racking your brain of who it could be, and then why it's not that person that you're thinking it is. Again, it kind of injects paranoia into you as you're viewing the film.
Yeah, and I think that it's another beautiful thing when you look at the script and you look at just the way that this film is directed and acted, is just the paranoia is played up beautifully. Because it's like at the start of this, everybody is very friendly with each other. You can tell that this is a group of men that they spent a lot of time together, but for the most part, they tolerate each other, as much as you can. You have a couple of people who are kind of, they like to pick at each other a little bit. But it is one of those things where it's like they definitely don't have any real animosity towards each other or anything like that. So when you introduce something like this threat of the thing or assimilation or an infection, and really, I don't think anything starts really falling fully to pieces until you start losing Blair, who's their senior biologist, played by Wilford Brimley, because he's the one they all kind of look to for answers. So when he starts going cuckoo, nuts, insane, everybody starts really turning animalistic and kind of like, I don't trust you. I have no reason to trust you. And it's just brilliantly done, because it's like they all kind of look to him for guidance, because he is the most qualified person in their midst to give them these answers. And the fact that he's losing it, I mean, you slowly start to see the cracks form and really start to shape the story and where everything's going once he starts to lose it. And I love the sequence of him running the data through the computer and seeing, how long will it take for, this, if this thing reaches population to
Classic
basically
80s.
assimilate the entire world. Yeah, computers just have all the answers right there in front of you. Like, they're kind of right, but at the same time, not like that.
Yeah.
But it was like something like 27,000 hours.
Yeah.
And then the entire planet is assimilated, basically. fucking wild, man. And then you know, like you have little encampments of people, you know. You have Niles the cook. He kind of just hangs out in his kitchen. He does his own thing. He's definitely the younger one of the group, and you know, he's just kind of, you know, always having fun listening to his music. And then you have people like Childs and Palmer, who you know, they hang out together, they smoke pot and watch TV and stuff like that. Like, I thought that was fucking hysterical. Like, how the hell does Palmer have all of this weed like up here? Like, I used to smoke pot habitually. So it's one of those things where it's like, how the fuck did you not run out? Like, if that's all you have to do, like, because I don't know what his
Got a
job
stash.
is. I don't know what his job is. It says he's an assistant mechanic, but like, I don't ever see him fix anything in the damn movie. He just smokes weed and fucking jokes around. So
And that's what I kind of love about being brought into this story, where, you know, they kind of created this. It's not a perfect, well-oiled kind of military machine at all. It's just kind of like these guys hanging out at this point. You can tell that they're all kind of comfortable. They found their own cliques. They do their own thing, you know. And, you know, McCready sitting there having a drink and playing chess, you know, and it's just very casual. People are playing ping pong. You know, it's not like this very formal kind of always work. You can tell that they've been there for a while. They're all comfortable with each other. So when you bring that element of, you know, the thing in there, and then this distrust where they're not used to it and they're so comfortable, it's almost like bringing that level of distrust into a family that you've been living with for, you know, months on end. And it's like, as soon as that happens, you don't know how to react. You get super paranoid because, again, you look at someone like Blair, where you're looking at them for answers and they're going insane, you know? So it's like, what does that mean for everybody else? So that paranoia just gets amplified. And I love that they're not just bringing this into this clear hierarchy. It's like you look at Gary, and he's so easy to kind of give up the mantle of being the leader in any sense. And it's like, okay, well, it clearly, if your leadership doesn't want to be the leader anymore, what does that really say about this whole machine as a whole here? So, you know, I think they really do bring that interesting element. It's such a believable kind of distrust that we would get there as everything just starts falling apart.
yeah, and before I think we can start moving on to our next segment here. But before we do, you know, I think it's only fair that we reference the film in which this is the film and book, I should say, that this is being adapted from. So, you know, it goes on from Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. We talked just very briefly about that. I mentioned it at least at the top, but it is one of those things where it's like this was adapted from that, which was technically an abridged version of Frozen Hell by the same author. And, you know, it's one of those things where it is not very similar to the story that we are being told here. Really, the only thing that's similar is that it is a research station, and that it is one of those things where it's a creature that takes many forms and assimilates people. But, you know, all of this charisma and characters, everything, none of the characters are the same. As far as I know, not many of the scenarios are the same. And then you have the 1951 Howard Hawks adaptation of that story with A Thing from Another World, which I have seen one time. Luke, have you ever seen that?
I have not.
Okay, I know we had talked about possibly watching that beforehand. Just we never pulled the trigger on purchasing it. But, you know, I definitely would recommend checking it out. It's pretty interesting to watch. I mean, it's an older film. You know, not saying there's anything wrong with it. And I think if you love this movie, you might get a kick out of it, but it's definitely not going to be like, oh, I absolutely adore this one because it's the superior version. I think that would be very difficult to outdo. But I mean, the importance of why I bring that up is because that film meant a lot to John Carpenter. I mean, he puts that film on in Halloween as just a sly reference to it. So he lobbied to adapt this. Like, this was something that, you know, when it was first pitched to him by Bill Lancaster as something to adapt, he was like, no, why would you do that? We don't want to redo that film. You know what I mean? Like, it's perfect, because to him, that's the thing, you know. It's like if I was in his shoes. But it's one of those things where he kind of looked at it as like, well, no, there is more to who goes there. There's a little bit of a different take, so maybe we could do something with this. And they worked on it for years, and then Bill Lancaster went out and found people to fund it at Universal, and it almost got off the ground, and then it didn't. And then finally, with the success of John Carpenter after Assault on Precinct 13 and Halloween, they were like, you can do it. Like, let's go. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely a huge passion project for him. And I think that it goes to show that, even if you're going to remake things, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that as long as you feel there's more story to be told, or you see the potential of a remake, those are the kind of remakes we should pursue. Because a lot of people sit here and say that remakes are no good, like that they're terrible, they're all bad. I always point to this movie. This is always the easiest one to do it, because this is a remake, and it is far superior than its original predecessor. It is the definitive telling of this story through and through, and always will be, no matter what Blumhouse comes out with, no matter if the script that I worked on and you worked on ever gets produced. To me, I think this will always stand as the superior version of this story.
Yeah, this is like the catapult, I feel like. And I'm talking about like how John Carpenter properties are so rich for, being expanded upon because of him just specializing in these one instances here. And like looking at this and knowing what you said, The Thing from Another Planet came out, 1951?
Yeah, 1951.
So this is 30 years later. And kind of doing that remake. Every choice that was made here was correct, where the ambiguity of what he does here, where it's like, okay, the thing from another planet, we just narrow it down to the thing, and it's like just looking at that and knowing what, seeing this, and I believe we never see the true form of the thing. It's like we don't know exactly what that looks like. Again, it's so ambiguous. We're not left with answered questions here. It's just more and more questions piling up as we go through this film. And, that was the experience that I think John Carpenter wanted to bring to this film. So it's like when you look at, I haven't seen the original. Does that one have a true form? Like, is it a man in a suit?
It is a Frankenstein-like monster.
Okay, yeah. And so it's like as you're saying, there has to be something in the tank for us to do a remake. Like this one, this is worthy of being called John Carpenter's The Thing, because this is the voice of John Carpenter. This is something so different than what we've seen previously. And then I think who goes there? I believe in my research there's like something like 37 characters, and they narrow it down here to, just a handful, where, again, all the right choices have been made, where this instance here kind of bringing this again reeks of 80s, that nostalgia, that creature effects here, the ambiguous nature. I think John Carpenter did everything right. This is how you do a remake.
Yes, I 100% agree. And, I think credit is due where credit is due. It's actually goes to Rob Bottin, the effects guru who drove himself to the hospital by the end of this film, basically sent himself to the hospital due to pure exhaustion working on this movie. But the reason I bring him up is because it was his idea in my research for this podcast. I never knew this, to say that we never know what the thing's true form is. And
what a smart choice.
Right?
It's like, I love the idea of as the thing is transitioning into, imitating something else. We get glimpses of what it maybe had previously been of other life forms, but we never get the true life form of what this thing is.
Yes, and I think that is so smart. And it's one of those things where it's like, when you think of that idea and just the way that it comes about, we'll discuss it here probably in Creatures Features, but it's one of those things where it's like, when that idea was pitched, the response that Rob Bottin gives is just incredible. But we'll move into our next segment. We'll start talking a little bit more about the behind the scenes of this flick, with the segment we like to call Behind the Mask. Yes. So this is our kind of behind the scenes segment. We save creature effects and, just effects in general for its own segment. But this is where we just kind of talk about the making of the film and just kind of rattle off a lot of the fun facts and everything about that when it comes to the assembly of this picture. Luke, did you check out the documentary?
I did not.
Okay. For anybody who's interested, there is a documentary that was on an old DVD release. It is on YouTube. You can watch it. It's about a little over an hour. Of course, the Scream Factory version, everything has more documentaries, things like that to dive into. I highly recommend it. It's a very detailed, goes over all these different stories of how they put it together. I probably watch it once a year. Once every couple years or so. I throw it on and just listen to it, especially when I'm working or, busy cleaning or something. It's just that interesting to listen to. And, they talk about just how they kind of got this together. Of course, we talked about John Carpenter and Bill Lancaster kind of pushing this film together, talking about the potential of it being a remake and everything. Some of the more interesting pieces, just kind of running through fun facts here, was that one of the big ones for me was that Kurt Russell was not actually attached as MacReady from the start of this.
Did they have someone in mind? Or
yeah, they had several people. I'm just trying to pull it up on my notes here. Yes, so this is basically how it shook out. They pitched it to Nick Nolte, and he turned down the role of MacReady. He wasn't interested in playing him for whatever reason. Then they went to Jeff Bridges, and, nope, Jeff Bridges wasn't interested. Okay, that was pretty close to Kurt Russell, I'd say, at least look-wise. And then Bill Lancaster wrote the script, and he said, well, why don't we try Harrison Ford? Nope, Harrison Ford's not interested. Well, Clint Eastwood was also in his mind. Clint Eastwood's not interested. So, they went all the way through all of these guys. So this is a pretty wild spectrum of, potential actors here for MacReady. And I thought you would find this very interesting. One of the things that was very funny to find in my research here was that someone who campaigned for the role extremely hard was a relatively unknown by the name of Fred Ward.
Really?
Yes, he really wanted to be a part of this. And he was trying so hard to get this role and land it because he wanted to work with John Carpenter.
Oh.
But it's one of those things where by the time he kind of popped up on the scene, Carpenter had already kind of, laid his cards out because Kurt Russell was helping him and Bill Lancaster with this search for actors. And he was just kind of like, well, what if you played him? And Kurt Russell was like, okay, I'll do it. That's fine. Because he wasn't even being considered from the start of this, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's like they're buddies, you know what I mean? Like they work together. So it's one of those things you think, why the fuck wouldn't he write this for him? But nope, he was not.
Yeah, and to kind of have Kurt Russell in your back pocket there. It's funny how we look at cinema nowadays with the hindsight of saying, it could have been this person or could have been that person. And who we get was not their first choice, because it's like looking at this is such a, John Carpenter film, but such a Kurt Russell vehicle where, a lot of this hangs on his performance, I think, as MacReady. That you can't really, it'd be hard to buy this as anyone else. Like if in a day of remakes, to remake this and kind of recast a MacReady, I don't know if anyone would buy that without Kurt Russell attached.
It would be tough, but I figured you'd get a kick out of the Fred Ward stuff because when I came across that, I was like, what the hell?
And they never worked together then. I can't think of anything.
No, I don't think so. And, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Because, we love Fred Ward on here. Check out our Tremors 2 podcast from early last year. Wonderful actor. Can't wait to talk about Tremors at some point down the road. It's one of those things where we're going to get there. And then also, I guess I should mention, originally, before when Universal was kind of trying to do this, and, they had Bill Lancaster kind of attached to it to write it, they sought out Tobe Hooper as the original director for this. Now, his version of this movie was very different. I'm going to tell you about it. So, Tobe Hooper was originally slated to direct and co-write the film before John Carpenter was attached. Hooper's version would have been drastically different from Carpenter's version, featuring an alien that did not shapeshift or assimilate, and following an Ahab-like character named the Captain, who goes on an epic quest to find and kill the Thing. The film would have served as its own film and as both a remake and sequel to the 1951 film. The little influence from John W. Campbell Jr.'s novella, which Hooper openly found to be boring. Hooper also wanted the film to be a horror comedy with slapstick humor. It was pitched as a swashbuckling action-adventure epic, a modern-day Moby Dick, set not on the ocean, but at the bottom of the world, Antarctica. Producers Drew Turner and Stuart Cohen were appalled by the pitch script and eventually fired Hooper, with Cohen later saying, "We avoided a disaster. It would have been one of the worst movies ever made."
That would have a lot of alterations to it. You know, I can't imagine that sitting there watching John Carpenter's The Thing and anyone trying to inject it to be a horror comedy would just be, I don't know, such a misstep for me. And it's like, looking at Tobe Hooper stuff, I think some of the things for me work and some of the things don't. And it's like, I think this, again, as we talk about in hindsight, as what we did get is probably what we were better off with. I cannot imagine anyone but John Carpenter helming this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I can't agree with you more on that. I mean, obviously, but it is one of those things where it is very funny to me that we almost had Tobe Hooper's version here, and it was just this wildly different version from anything.
I would like to see a script for that one,
right? Like just to see like Ahab and Antarctica and everything. And like the idea of just like them saying, well, there's more gas in the tank here, we can, use the shape-shifting creature from the novella, and him being like, no, that's boring, I don't like that. Like the vision for Tobe Hooper on this project was very narrow, and I love Tobe Hooper.
This would have turned out to be Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2.
You bastard. Anyway, we'll deal with that next Thanksgiving. Or this upcoming Thanksgiving, now that it's 2023. But it's one of those things where for me, I love Tobe Hooper. I do. I think that he does have a lot of great work. But yeah, I mean, just the idea of this not being John Carpenter is just so foreign and strange. I could never imagine. Something I could imagine, though, and believe me, I love Wilford Brimley in this movie. He is fantastic.
Yeah.
But can you take a guess at who Carpenter tried to originally cast as Blair in this film?
No, I wouldn't even be able to venture a guess, I don't think.
You can't even venture a guess?
No, no. Is it a usual suspect of John Carpenter?
It's a usual suspect.
Let me see. I can't think anyone.
Donald Pleasance.
Why didn't we get Donald Pleasance?
Donald Pleasance was the original choice for the character of Blair. Pleasance was unable to perform the role due to a scheduling conflict. So he was already working on another project. I tried to look into it. It wasn't fully clear on what project that was at the time. But yeah, it was this movie. When it did get rolling, it had to get done quickly.
Okay, yeah.
So it's one of those things where they just couldn't get it together. And then, Carpenter was happy to have Wilford Brimley play the role also. So it was kind of like he could have had it either way. Obviously, it didn't hurt their relationship because they ended up working together again multiple times. So, it just would have been very interesting to have Kurt Russell and Pleasance in the same film.
Yeah, having Donald Pleasance in this film would have really been intriguing. I wonder if that role would have been beefed up a little bit too, considering the relationship that Carpenter did have with Pleasance, to see exactly what he would have done. Because, toward the end of this film, where we kind of get a little more Blair, I could have seen that kind of strung out for a little bit longer and kind of giving him a little bit more moments, maybe with some of the cast. And I think that would have been interesting to see. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen Donald Pleasance in this film, to be honest.
I know, right? Doesn't it just gets the brain turning of just
Yeah.
seeing him as the doctor who kind of the lead biologist, I should say, who finds out all this stuff, and just did you see him leaned over in the shack with the noose, just
Yes.
giving the I'm better now, I'm
Yep.
all right.
He's like,
I
"Hey,
I
man."
say it, and it's like I always like give the tone of Wilford Brimley because it's so iconic.
Yep.
But like, damn, Donald Pleasance doing it would be something else, man.
The delivery would be so different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really, we should say, I know that I said that's what kind of got Carpenter interested, was the idea of going back and really getting to dissect this film and add some new life to it. But when he read Bill Lancaster's script for the first time, he always cites that John Carpenter was sold on making the film by the blood test scene. He was adamant to create a monster movie where the creature wasn't obviously played by a man in a suit, something that bothered him somewhat while watching Alien.
Mm.
So, he could tell that was obviously a man in a suit.
Yeah.
But, when he read the blood test scene, he was just like, this is different. This is everything that I was looking for in kind of like an alien invasion kind of film.
Yeah, and again, what a unique voice this one has. This is such a turning point. I mean, we'll talk about effects here in a minute, but like with using the effects to storytell so much and add the tension. I mean, like the
Mhm.
blood test scene where they're all tied up, and as once the blood starts flowing and we get the thing kind of appearing, the way those transformation scenes work, it just adds so much to the actual story from a visual perspective of it, to kind of just have to have it be a man in a suit with just one form, I think would have taken so much away from this film.
Yes. And I think we talk about the effects a little bit here. Rob Bottin, or Rob Bottin, however you want to say it, he was someone who had already worked with Carpenter as an actor. If you weren't aware, did you know that he was in The Fog?
Yes. Well, we talked about this because
When we covered The Fog, I wasn't 100% sure if
Yep.
we had mentioned it.
Yeah, in the original incarnation of SplatterCast, where we covered The Fog, we did talk about that.
Yeah, but I'll get into it a little bit for those who don't know. Rob Bottin intended to play Palmer after his performance as Blake in The Fog 1980, which, for those who your memory is shaky, Blake is the lead captain of the ghost killers, whatever you want to call them, entities. This made the crew balk, as they believed he could barely handle the effects work as it was. Effects man Roy Arbogast was so furious at this intention that he threatened to quit the film if this happened. So it's kind of like these effects were so intense, and so they needed all the dedication they could. They were just like, "Are you serious? You're gonna fucking play a character too? Like you're going to act and do these effects? Absolutely not." So I just think it's interesting. That was one of my big takeaways when doing kind of the behind the scenes research on this.
Yeah.
Just all the potentials, all the almost the what ifs that we got in this, because we don't see a lot of that. But this film really is so well documented and so ripe for some work. Honestly, if I was a writer, I would sit back and probably try to compile as much of this into like a taking shape novel as I could.
Yeah.
Because there's so much about this movie that could have been, almost was, and then also just like the stories themselves. Like I got an interesting story here, but I want to know your thoughts on that before we move forward there.
Well, just to kind of, I wanted to ask, wasn't production delayed quite a bit during, like, for weather or something like that? Did they touch on that?
There was a little bit of that here and there, because this was what I was going to get into next, was that at one point when all the cast, so they would shoot scenes. I'm going to just bring this up too, so we can kind of kill two birds with one stone on this. To give the illusion of an icy Antarctic conditions, interior sets on the Los Angeles soundstage were refrigerated to below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. while it was well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So the cast talks about literally they would be inside freezing. They're wearing their gear and everything inside these sound stages, doing their stuff. And then they would go outside in their snow like uniforms, and it's over 100 degrees Los Angeles. So like they're talking about like they would just get so sick of everything that they would go to lunch and they'd walk to the studio and they'd literally just be saying, well, I'm not taking off all my stuff. There will be air conditioning there, and they are just dripping with sweat because they're in long sleeves and sweaters and overalls and everything. Like they're not trying to take it all off. So it's just one of those things where it's like they were just having a hell of a time on set. And then when they got to location, because they went forgive me, I believe I have it written down here somewhere. I have a lot of notes this time, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm just kind of trying to dive through here. But when they went to their actual shooting location, that's when they started to run into a lot of weather issues.
Yeah.
Like you were asking. So they shot in British Columbia, and it was one of those things where they went up this, like, it's almost like this little mining area they went up to, and it was on this kind of this mountainous terrain. So they had to take a bus up there, and just to get to the cabins where they were staying. And then when they got there, they had to take mining carts to go further up to where the set was. So it's one of those things where that created a whole bunch of issues where people had to be bussed from set to set with mining carts after working sometimes 14 to 15 hour days, just because they couldn't. It was so strenuous just to get cast, crew, and everything up and down. And it created a lot of issues for the equipment, because they were afraid that when they got so cold out there and they were shooting, they couldn't bring the cameras inside the sets, because they were just like, well, if we bring this in, this could damage the film because of that immediate, cold to hot. So it's just one of those things where it's like there was all kinds of issues there. One of the biggest issues was before they even started filming up there was, so they're driving out there and they got the whole cast. I think everybody except John Carpenter and Kurt Russell. So like all the extra cast members are on a bus, like a Greyhound, and they're going up the mountain to where the cabins are and everything. And it starts to snow, and the snow starts to turn into a blizzard, of course. And, everybody's kind of asleep. One of the cast members was very sick. I think he had food poisoning. So, everybody's just kind of there. It's apparently the dead of night, and they're sleeping. Everybody's getting ready to go to sleep. And then they just hear the bus driver start yelling, slide, slide, slide. And the bus starts to slide. Now, mind you, they're going up a mountain with no railing. So they legitimately thought that they were going to go over the edge of this mountain. And so they all stopped. Luckily, everything stopped. And they ended up having to drive very, very, very slowly. And they ended up driving all the way for, I think, probably about 4 or 5 hours, they said, in the dark, until they got to this motel. And they were just going to stop there. The motel was closed for the season. So they had to get back in the bus and keep driving. And then they got to the location at probably, I think they said about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And Carpenter comes out with a cup of coffee. He's like, hey, guys, hey, happy you guys made it and everything, all this stuff. Everybody is exhausted and pissed and tired. And he's just kind of like all jovial and stuff. And they just talk about his reaction of just like, oh, what the hell happened to you guys? And they had to explain this entire story to him about how, and I forgot to mention, when they were trying to leave the motel, the bus got, when they were trying to get to the motel, the snow had built up so much and it was on this little hill that they had to get out, and all the cast and the little bit of crew that were with them had to push the bus up the hill just to find out it was closed. So it's just one of those things where it's like they went through complete hell and then just slept all the first day because they couldn't, like, they were dead.
And like just looking at that and the issues that they get to just be able to get to that setting where looking at it, there's such an authentic presentation about it, and it's like, again, that is so much the film where, like you had mentioned earlier, where you can sit there, it makes you feel warm and cozy inside, where everyone else is freezing their ass off on camera, and it's like they're legitimately freezing, so I think that's pretty evident in the performance, and it's, I think you, as an actor, when you have that type of authentic, I guess, setting, it really brings out the presentation that you do see on film, so it's like, at the end when Childs and McCready are sitting there in the dark and in the freezing cold, I feel like you do feel that kind of exhaustion in their performance where, they're tired, they're cold, and just the idea of having to get there, and how I guess hazardous it had become, just for that authentic setting where, some days, you do get the CGI and, maybe it's not the best presentation where like this is, punk rock. This is, you're going out there and you're doing it, so, and I think that's what, again, John Carpenter brings to his films here, where it's, you can get lost in that setting. Like, I feel like I am there and I am freezing. It's like you need to put on a winter coat to watch this film. It's just intriguing to see what the cast has to go through to actually get there. Because I would have been like, you know what, I'm gonna tap out and I'm gonna be done here.
Yeah, I mean, for God's sakes, just the little stuff that we've been able to do. It's like we shot in November once and it was very cold.
And having to carry equipment just up and down hills, I can't imagine in freezing cold weather.
I know, just insane. But yeah, I mean, that's just some of the many stories that basically plagued this film. There's other fun facts and things here that I could get into, but a lot of them are more cast related. The only one that I feel like I can kind of leave us off on before we dive into our next segment here is so I think it's pretty well known, but for those who don't, I don't even know if you know about this. There was a lot of unused music produced for this film. So, this was produced by Ennio Morricone. He did a lot of the, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, that kind of stuff. He's a very famous composer. And, Carpenter did a few tracks himself, but this is one of the few films where he didn't score much of it himself because he was so caught up with everything else that he had him come in and work on the soundtrack. And it's a wonderful, iconic soundtrack. I mean, it's amazing. But it's kind of funny here. There's a little bit of irony to this. So unused music composed for the film was later used by Ennio Morricone in Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. So I know the track Bestiality is very prevalent in that. They use that. And ironically, Morricone's The Thing score was nominated for a Razzie for Worst Score back when this film came out. And while his score for Hateful Eight won him an Oscar.
It's funny how, as time passes and you realize, how this film was looked at, not just the music, but the film in general, and how this was looked at is baffling, because it's like looking at this movie and knowing how ingrained this is in us growing up and even in today in terms of wanting to be filmmakers and being inspired by different films and ideas, and to know the hate that this film got just generally is very baffling to me. It's very different. It's like, because it's hard for me to talk about this film with anyone and no one, it seems the consensus is generally positive. I don't think I've ever met anyone that did not like John Carpenter's The Thing. So to know that was the consensus was that this was, not a great film. It was just a gore fest and blood and guts and in creatures is really weird, because it's like looking at that score. It's so iconic. It sticks in your head. It adds so much to the actual film itself. To know that even wasn't even looked at positively is really weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that in kind of our legacy segment at the end, because like I have a lot to say about that, and kind of a nice fun little note to leave off on. It was my intent there. But why don't we dive into our next segment where we get to talk a little bit more about the cast and crew in what was previously called You Are All My Children, but is now known as Everybody is a Suspect.
See, the police are always off track with this shit. If they watch prom night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
Yes, so this is our new kind of title and sound effect, whatever you want to call it, for the cast and crew segment, which obviously very straightforward. We're here to talk about the cast and the crew. And one of the things that is this film is very well known for, which even goes against the 1951 film, is this is an all-male cast.
Mhm.
There is not a single female actress in this film. And it is strange because the 1951 film does have a female character in it. Again, that was not any part of the adaptation. I don't even know if there's any female characters in the John W. Campbell novel. I believe there are. But there was something about it where Carpenter just was very adamant about just having a bunch of guys locked up in a kind of a research station in Antarctica and just having that dynamic and seeing just what he would do when you have a lot of budding testosterone and a lot of, people who see themselves as more alpha male types trying to take charge. It's just, he felt that would play a lot better, to the screen. And I think it does. I think that it does definitely add that element of, kind of seeing these guys kind of crumble and at one point kind of be real gruff and mean with each other, but then see these horrifying images and watching them just shake and crumble. You see a lot of emotion throughout this movie through these characters and just kind of what they go through.
Yeah, and like how you're saying, I think this is interesting to kind of do an all-male cast to kind of show that kind of alpha-ness, I would say, where I think the most evident portion is when Gary gives up the mantle, of being the leader, and then, Childs is ready to take over, and they say, we need someone maybe more level-headed, and everyone decides on Mac. It's like, you see those guys that are eager to be the leader, and there's ones that are like, I don't want any part of it, and ones that have power give up power. So it's like, I think, absolutely intentional to kind of do this all-male cast and to kind of see this almost toxic element that is brought here with this masculinity that we'll see. And, like I said, this isn't a well-oiled machine in any sense. This isn't, some sort of military operation. This is kind of by the time we're brought into this and dropped in, it's very casual. It's, there's been a camaraderie built, but there's probably underlying tension between a lot of these characters, and you start seeing that as it gets heightened here. So it's like picking an all-male cast, I think, is probably one of the most intriguing elements of this.
I agree. And, it is, it's something we don't see very often nowadays. I wonder if we'll ever really see something like that again. Just because, Hollywood and, everything is about inclusion and everything. And it's like, you're so worried about offending somebody.
Yeah.
And, it's like, I'm all for, inclusion and bringing more people in and giving, people of different races or genders who maybe didn't have all those opportunities back when films like this were made. Those opportunities, of course, but it's just one of those things too, where it's like, I feel like a film like this, if it went out there and was known or sought at for doing this, would almost become vilified.
Yeah.
And, you even see it with the opposite way with films like 2016 Ghostbusters.
Oh, yeah.
And, the recent Charlie's Angels. And, what's that other one? The Black Christmas,
Yeah.
where, it's a primarily female cast. People hate on those, you know, and it's like a lot of people will point the incels and things like that on stuff like that, but even then it's like they didn't do well at the box office. So it's not just the people who, you know, run their mouths online. It's the general audiences. I think that people prefer to have a little bit of diversity, because you even see in the which I'm not calling it a remake, but it's a prequel, the prequel film to this, which we haven't even touched on yet. But I think as we go along, there will definitely be a SplatterCast episode on it.
Oh, absolutely.
Where because that thing's got a whole story of its own behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But even though, and I think that movie, not to go on a soapbox, very much deserves a reappraisal from people, because I don't think that movie's bad at all. But it is one of those things where it's like they even add a female character, and it's Elizabeth Winstead. She's wonderful. I love her character in that, and yeah. So, you know, it's just one of those things where it's like, I wonder if we'll ever see this dynamic again. And I like to think we will at some point, but it is one of those things where it's like, this is almost kind of a rarity at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's you know, dealing with that testosterone element, I think is really what they're harkening back on here. So it's like, I really think we could see that eventually down the road, because you look at these, a lot of products of the 80s were very primarily a female cast, or a male cast in a lot of senses. I mean, you look at, like, especially a lot of science fiction things. So it's like, I think that really does add a lot to the uniqueness of the thing, especially looking back on it now, where you don't see it that often anymore, where this is just primarily male, and then them kind of dealing with those. Again, when you're dealing with the leadership issues like that, I feel like that is such a toxic masculinity kind of idea, especially as soon as someone gives up that element of power. So, like, to kind of bring that into it, I think really sells this cast.
Absolutely. So why don't we get into this cast a little bit here? So, you know, we'll talk about, you know, a couple of these guys here. So I'm just going to kind of start from probably, you know, they're all very interesting and important in their own right. But Thomas G. Waits, who played Windows, otherwise known as the radio operator. You know, he brings, in my eyes, especially on this last viewing, kind of this, you know, again, he's another younger guy. I think him and Niles are probably the youngest people in the research station. I almost love the comedy aspect to his character, where towards the early half of this film, you just have people constantly coming in and being like, "Did you get in contact with anybody out there?" And he's just like, "I haven't talked to anybody on this whole continent for 2 fucking weeks. Like, get off my back," kind of thing. And he gets it bad. I mean, Jesus Christ, the way he goes out is rough.
And that's where I know him from Warriors. So it's like, I think I had seen Warriors previously before seeing the thing. So as soon as I see him with the beard, I'm like, oh man. But you know, it's like going into where he's like instantly, I haven't talked to anyone. You know, it's like, again, we get that kind of annoyed kind of idea from him, where it's like, okay, quit asking me these questions. You know, and I mean, he gets some screen time, I think, as he really sells that kind of paranoia as well. And again, like you're saying, his death is just very vicious. It's like, I wanted him to make it out so bad just because of the nostalgia of Warriors for me. But, you know, it was not meant to be. And then him just, I love the shot of him, you know, being picked up by the thing, and we're focusing on the reactions of people, and just in the background, he's being swung around and it's like bleeding all over the place. I love the way they bring that, especially when he's dropped on the ground and just bleeding, and then McCready just burns him. I mean, it's like, you know, I think this is where we have the main big characters, and then kind of the great casting, like Windows. I mean, it really adds to this whole the thing, you know, like a well-rounded kind of film.
Yeah, and you know, I do enjoy that character. Again, you're right. He doesn't get, you know, a lot of screen time or anything like that, or really anything too deep of a dive. Yeah. But he does add a bit of charisma and a bit of, you know, a different dynamic to the group here. And I think that's the whole thing. You lose a little bit from this if you take any of these members out, I feel like.
Well, and that's where it's like, as we get into this, where The characters that are more in depth are meant to be in depth, but and I think that's the beauty of a great screenplay and great characters is you're never going to have time to dive deep into every different character, but just giving you just enough to resonate with and to be able to pick them out to be like, okay, I like this character. I think that's the beauty of it, and I think the thing does it really well.
Yes. And then we'll go on to Joel Polis, who plays Fuchs. Again, another great character actor. Somebody that I really I don't recognize him from anything else.
Yeah, I don't.
Really, this is kind of the only film that I kind of associate him with. But it is one of those things where it's like I still I like his character a lot. Like I think that he does bring a lot of the weird thing I want to say is like not necessarily humanity, but like he's the I think the scene that voice of reason, yeah, is a good way to put it, because like he is the character that I always the scene that I always pick out is when him and McCready go into the snowmobile.
Yes.
And he starts telling him that he's worried about Blair. So like that's one of my favorite scenes with him. I think it's probably his most prominent scene. But it's like it is one of those things where he's like just pulling McCready aside and giving his 2 cents on the matter. It's one of those things where it's like he's definitely not really the macho type. He's not really trying to be the alpha. He's more, again, perfectly said. He's the voice of reason.
He's like such a comfort character where I never suspect him of anything. So it's like when he's actually talking, I find it like face value, and it's not where your paranoia is already heightened. It's kind of like when you're listening to him, you feel like it is actually like a true statement. It's not something where he's trying to spin anything or anything like that. So I find him to be almost that comfort character.
Mm-hmm. And then we can go on to Donald Moffat, who plays Gary, also known as Captain. Which I kind of find is ironic that Palmer calls him that because of what the almost was with the Tobe Hooper script. So, I think one of my favorite scenes, I mean, obviously it's right at the opening of the film is when he pops the Norwegian and then Palmer's giving him some shit. He's like, oh, it's, Captain was just happy he finally got to use his pop gun. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. So it's like I love the dynamic between those two because he's very much that kind of like he strikes me as somebody who could be like a sheriff of a town kind of thing. He just carries himself that way, and Palmer is just so the other way. So it's like they have a good dynamic. But yeah, I like him a lot. Again, he has a great line when the blood scene, when he's like, now I appreciate what we're doing to you, gentlemen, but could someone please untie me from this fucking couch? Something like that. Like, fantastic.
Yeah, and I kind of see him as more so fumbling a lot of the time, where it's like, who knows how he got in that position that he's in, but it seems like he's not necessarily well fitted for basic operations, but when something like this goes awry, it's like he has absolutely zero idea how to handle it or how to go about it. And just wants to be out of the situation completely.
Yep, I agree. And then we can go on to one of the most interesting characters, I'd say, of the group, Richard Mauser's Clark. Again, Clark, I love Richard Mauser's explanation for this, is that he went to Carpenter and he said, I want to play this character as a little bit more of like an introvert type. I don't want to be like, overly friendly or overly, abrasive or anything. He's like, I almost want the audience to never get like a warm sense of trust with me.
Yeah.
Like he just wants to, he says one of the best ways he describes it is he almost has more in common with the animals that he takes care of than the people there. Yeah. And I think that's just so fucking smart because, you don't trust him. You don't trust Clark. At least I don't. During any viewing of this, and the fact that he dies and then they find out that he was never the thing, they literally killed him and he was human, is one of the most impactful scenes in the movie. And it's just so crazy, and how everybody reacts to that and everything is like, so he was a person, so you just murdered a guy, kind of thing. When McCready's kind of losing, everybody's kind of going over the edge there. And it's definitely, I think, one of the more interesting performances. The more you see this film, the more you watch it. And again, if you watch that documentary, I think you'll fall in love with the character of Clark more, just hearing Richard Mauser's perspective.
Yeah. And see, like, looking at that character, I find him to be one of the most compelling, I would say, just because he finds a home more so with the animals than the human beings. And like looking at it, he's very quiet, almost standoffish in a sense. As an audience member, you don't really know how to gauge him most of the time. But I feel like he's just got this annoyance with human beings, especially being already probably in that cabin fever aspect of it, and just kind of finding that home amongst the dogs, and kind of that's where he wants to be. Um, and then kind of watching everything kind of all this fallout happen, where it's like he always seems to be the person observing most of the situation up until the very end and when he gets shot. But it's just like I feel like he's kind of got this annoyance with humanity almost, that just kind of is conveyed in that subtle performance that he does have.
Yes, and do you recognize him from anything else?
I recognize him from he's from My Girl. I know him from that. I know he's been in a handful of other things.
Probably the most noteworthy for this podcast specifically is that he does play Stanley Uris in the 1990 version of It.
There we go.
So
yes,
yeah.
I remember. Yep.
Yes. So I always like Clark. Again, I don't trust the guy, but at the end of the day, he turned out to be human, and I still think his performance is very interesting. And then we got Peter Maloney as George, or Bennings, as we'll also know him by. I think that Bennings was one of those characters that I almost felt like I feel bad for a lot of the guys in this, but like I don't know why, but I feel really bad for Bennings when he turns.
Yeah.
It's just such a rough sequence. And I'd say one of the more iconic sequences.
It's
for
probably
sure.
one of the most terrifying, I feel, of the entire film. Just so unsettling and weird. And then when he's burnt, just the howl that he lets out, and in the kind of mid transformation that they catch him in, where almost human except the hands are not. So iconic, and again so unsettling. You kind of really feel for that character, because I mean he gets shot at the very beginning.
Yeah, right. He gets shot in the leg, and then just that having him stretch out his arms and everything, and have that, like, I want that to be a NECA figure real bad. I want Bennings with like the half transformation. We are getting the dog, we know that. So
Yes.
yeah, I mean, he's definitely, again, somebody that I sympathize for immensely, because you're right, he does get shot. I love the lead up to his assimilation as well.
Yeah.
And that quick glimpse you see of the tentacles all around him, and him just
Yes.
being kind of like naked and covered in slime.
Yeah.
It's all just very unsettling. It always sticks with you. I remember being very unsettled by that the first time I ever saw it.
Yeah, and I love that. I think that's honestly the first glimpse you get of that assimilation kind of process, I think. And again, the beauty of Carpenter is where he keeps it very minimal, where we don't get too much into it. We just get a couple seconds of it, and kind of let our imagination go wild there. So again, one of the most unsettling scenes of the entire film, and it kind of just it's one of the scenes you think about when you think about The Thing.
100%. And then Charles Holohan as Norris, Vance Norris. Again, another horrifying death.
Yeah.
Probably, is this the most iconic Creatures moment? I mean, they're all kind of iconic, but like, this is the one a lot of people know.
Yeah, I would say for me, this is probably the most iconic, just from transition from the start to the end, and what the process is that we go through there. So many iconic transformations throughout that one that for me, it's my definitive one.
I know, just with the chest popping open.
Yes.
And
then when the head pops off.
Yeah, I mean, fucking A. Definitely Rob Bottin working overtime on that one. But yeah, we'll get to it in Creatures Features, but there's a lot with that. But yeah, I mean, Norris just another one that I do feel bad for throughout this whole situation, because you can just tell that he's super nervous. I mean, he's constantly like grabbing at his heart and stuff like that. He's got the weak heart. and everything. And it's just, yeah, he is just not composing himself very well throughout this flick.
And again, his death adds an interesting element into the Thing lore because he has a heart attack and he's already been assimilated. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of just shows, the expansiveness that they wanted to bring to the assimilation here.
Yeah, it is very, it's one of those things where it does kind of play into people have this theory that, like, do you know if you're the Thing
Yeah.
until you burst, because of Norris's heart attack.
Yeah.
Because it's like and that's the thing too, is where the Thing kind of assimilates everything to perfection, almost to a fault of its own, because I'm sure it could have assimilated itself with a better heart,
Yeah.
but it didn't. It's assimilated him perfectly. There's a lot there, and I've seen a lot of videos on it. I almost want to do my own video about just this film and breaking down all of the instances where it's like, what is this creature doing? When do people get assimilated? Because it's just, you could sit there for hours and just write. Like, you could do like Charlie from That's Always Sunny with the fucking board and everything,
Yes.
just being like,
Yeah.
this is where this happened and all that. We'll move on to Dr. Cooper, or Copper, my bad, with Richard Dystra. Again, one of my favorite characters.
Yes.
He also,
I love the casting
in that sequence with Norris. He is the one to get the dirty business done to him with getting his arms ripped off. Yeah, one of the most brutal sequences in this film for sure.
Especially, like, he really sells that being like the doctor of everything and kind of coming up with the plans and stuff like that. I love his interactions with McCready as well. And like you said, he's on the receiving end of that most brutal scene right there with the hands being chopped off. Man, what a way to go! That's really where the everything really starts kicking off and all hell breaks loose. Again, so iconic.
Absolutely. And then we have David Clennon as Palmer. Again, we've said Palmer, very funny character. Very unsuspecting. When he turns, it's almost one of the more disturbing. It's very disturbing because he's just so, like, he's just sitting there just shaking. And like, he just has been quiet this whole time, which is kind of not like him. He's always chiming in. Yeah, I feel like that's part of his MO of why we should have suspected him in that moment. But so much is going on that it's almost like he just slips in. It's one of those ones where you wonder where he picked it up,
Yeah, and especially this brutality, the way that scene's cut is 1 minute he's shaking, next minute he's like bleeding from the eyes. It's like, good Lord.
And then TK Carter as Knowles, the cook, another character that I just feel horrible for.
I love it.
Yep, superstitious, a little bit of Stevie Wonder. Love that.
He brings so much charisma, I think, even though his scenes are limited, just like when we're opened up there. And that, I think, was it Bennings who tells him turn down the radio? It's like, I've been shot today. And then
he goes, I got shot today.
And then he just pretends to turn down the radio and just keeps on with his day. I just love that.
Absolutely, yeah. And then we'll get to Wilford Brimley here. We've said a lot of positive things about him already on this, but I think that, him as Blair, one of the most iconic sequences, like, just characters in this whole film, ends up kind of being our main antagonistic force that the Thing assimilates, because he does go to build the ship, and then he is kind of the last assimilated person, so we can kind of suspect. And I think that he has some of the best scenes. Again, we talk about the computer scene and them kind of counting down when all this is going to break out, and just understanding how the assimilation works. It's just very, very well performed, very iconic.
Yeah, his delivery as a character and just a lot of his lines, especially with McCready, I think it is fantastic. I really would have loved to have seen him get a little more, like when he's assimilating Gary at the end there. Very brutal and unsettling again, where it's like, I really would have loved to have seen him be able to get out a little more and kind of make use of that character, just because Blair is very compelling. And when he's delivering those lines, I mean, what a master kind of sociopath that he is to kind of make you believe anything that he wants you to.
Yeah. Really he is. And again, I always go back to, oh, I'm feeling better now. I'm feeling
Yep.
all right. Kind of scene. Like, it's just so unsettling with the noose there and everything. Like, this motherfucker was gonna kill himself. Now he's telling me he's fine. Like, I don't think he's good.
He's like, I'm better now. I'm cool.
McCready makes the best call there. And then that brings us down to our two guys here, the two kings of the ring, in my opinion. I believe yours as well. We'll start with Keith David. Obviously, we're big fans. We covered Spawn, in which we talked a lot about Keith David, with him being, the voice of Spawn. Probably, easily, I think we'd agree on this, the definitive representation of Spawn.
Oh yeah, I would say without question.
Okay.
He's
I
just
know
got
you're a
that
big
voice.
Michael Jai White fan. I didn't want to.
Yeah,
upset
I
you.
mean, like appearance wise, hey, Michael Jai White's perfect, but like voice wise, that delivery, I think Keith David just takes the mantle there.
So fucking good. And this is his first major film role, we should say. Before that, he was in a couple of uncredited flicks. Disco Godfather in 79 as a club patron, uncredited, and Pirates and Police in a movie that was called Pirates in Penzeus, and then this. So that's he was uncredited roles up until this point. So Carpenter put him on the map, and then he was able to pop up in things like Platoon and all kinds of other shit, like They Live. Again, another major one there for Luke. That's your favorite Carpenter flick. You got things like, I'm just going through his filmography here and trying to hit the ones that stand out to me. But I mean, Jesus, this guy has been in over 360 films. So there's a lot of that.
And he's just phenomenal. Like, I really wish what I think his marriage with Carpenter lasted for The Thing and They Live. I don't know if it went beyond that, but I really would have loved to have seen him be like a definitive leading character. I know he kind of shares it with Kurt Russell and then Roddy Piper a little bit later on. I really would have loved to have seen him kind of get his own vehicle, because he's more than capable of carrying something like that. He's like a Tony Todd, where it's like you just want to see these guys and kind of stretch their legs and do their own thing.
Yeah, and it's definitely, he's still working today. I mean, he does the voice of the president on Rick and Morty. He's in a ton of TV stuff. He's actually, as far as upcoming flicks, he is going to be in Chris Stuckman's Shelby Oaks.
Yeah.
Which is pretty neat. And then he was just in this past summer's Nope. So, dude has no problem getting work. Like,
he's only gotten better with age, to be honest.
Seriously, yeah, I fucking love Keith David. Again, you're right. I want to see him in more stuff with Carpenter. If we get one more Carpenter film, even if it's just a cameo, I'd love to have him show up.
Yeah, I'd love to see him return to horror in a
absolutely. Hey, Shelby Oaks.
Yeah,
there you go.
I think he really can have a big resurgence there, and if he kind of makes that his home.
I agree. Alrighty, and that's everybody. So let's move on. No, I'm kidding.
It doesn't matter.
We got Kurt Russell as MacReady. Of course, we say on this podcast, it's very well known that we love Kurt. He's a friend of the podcast. Huge,
exactly.
Daddy Kurt. We love you, Mr. Russell. I mean, this is, in my mind, the most definitive role for him. MacReady is his best performance. It's his most iconic character. Again, I think about those quieter moments with him, the sarcasm, and just like how he carries himself. And I always think about when they're talking about going up in the helicopter, and he's like, I'm not saying I'm not gonna, but I'm just letting you guys know what the deal is here, kind of thing, where he's like, it could get hairy. And it's just like stuff like that. And then just the way he's able to take charge through the film. And, the distrust, a lot of people say that they're like, oh, I bet they think that he is the Thing at the end of the film. And it's like, I don't think that at all. There's no way that he's been assimilated, but who knows? And most iconic role in my opinion, for Kurt Russell here.
I love Kurt Russell. I think maybe Christmas Chronicles 1 and 2 kind of edges out the thing. But no, yeah, for me, I mean, he has so many iconic roles. It's really hard to narrow it down. I mean, Big Trouble in Little China is just so good, as well as Escape from New York, Snake. But it's like McCready just has this element to him that where you look at the other characters, I think kind of Kurt Russell was really wanted to play those characters different. Where for me, like, and sometimes the subtlety in a performance is the best kind, and I think that's what he brings with McCready here. Where he's not that. I don't find him to be overly masculine. He's not itching to take the mantle. He's just kind of the most level-headed, I think, out of the group, and kind of elected being the helicopter pilot and stuff. So for me, it's like he's not. The most well fit for the job. Just he ends up kind of falling into it, and I think that's just kind of the beauty of that character in general. Where everyone talks about him kind of drawing the parallel of that opening scene with him in playing the chess and then dumping the drink inside the computer. Just if I can't beat you, well, we're all gonna go to hell here. And I think and they draw that parallel till the end of we're not gonna get out of here, so let's sabotage everything so that the thing does not make his way out of here. So it's like. I love that character. It adds so much to the realm of science fiction. I think, again, when we talk blueprint, I think a lot of people look at the McCready character to kind of be that blueprint of, that leading man in a science fiction film. He's a guy you could have a drink with as long as he's not around a computer. But
There you go.
it's just,
Killing Adrian Barbeau.
there we go. I think he's a lot of fun, and I would agree with you that Kurt Russell's had so many iconic roles, but McCready, it's just, I think, on another level for me.
Absolutely. But alrighty, guys, that's going to probably wrap up our cast and crew segment. We kind of got to get things rolling here. That's the end of Everybody's a Suspect. So why don't we talk about some special effects in Creatures features? Maybe. So this, of course, like I said, and teed up is our effects segment where we now get to gush about the work of Rob Bottin, who, as we've already stated, ran himself so rampant in this film that he stayed on set. He slept on set. He'd wake up, go to work, and then he'd work until he passed out. And that's what he did up until the end of this film, where he literally was so exhausted. He looked so terrible that Carpenter said, look, you got to go to the hospital. And they diagnosed him with extreme exhaustion. I think they gave him a couple of Valium and made him fall asleep. And I think he says when he slept, he ended up sleeping for almost like a day and a half just to kind of recoup. And even then took him a couple weeks of just kind of taking it easy and resting just to get back to normal.
When you look at the catalog of effects that go into this film, and again, story is great, but the effects really drive home the story here visually. You can see why he would have extreme exhaustion here, because some of the things that just watching this, even in this viewing, it's like, how in the hell does that even happen? We were talking about the Norse scene and going from, opening of the chest to setting him on fire to the head popping off. It's just some of the things, like, especially at that time, to be able to do that and kind of have this seamless transition from one thing to the next is just baffling to me.
Yeah, and I agree with you right there. It is definitely some of the most impactful horror film effects. I mean, just effects in general.
Yeah.
You look at this thing in 4K, because I got the Steelbook there. And, this was my first time watching it in 4K. I bought this last year. I do have it digitally, so usually I just flip it on. And it's one of those things where I was just like, no, for this, I'm going to throw the 4K on. And I can't believe I didn't do it sooner because this film never looked better. And those effects, I was worried that maybe, the intense clarity would maybe kind of take away from some of it. But no, it looks so real and so gross. They're able to hold in, that film grain and everything, but still make it look so impactfully clear, like the colors of the reds and the creature as it assimilates people and everything. It's just unnatural, unbelievable.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many centerpieces in this where you go back to. It's hard to choose just one because it's like, as soon as we're going through this film and we don't know necessarily what we're in for, and then we put the dog in the kennel with all the other dogs, and the face splits open, and we start seeing this conglomeration of all these dogs being assimilated, and then as Childs comes in to hit him with the flamethrower, the kind of flower that comes out with these teeth spines in it is just disgusting. It's like, I understand why people when this film had come out were unsettled by it, but it's like
Mhm.
I don't understand necessarily the hate for it because it's just something as a horror fan you just are enthralled by.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where one of the most unsettling parts about the dog scene for me, and I really picked it up, I think, through my 4K watch, was just how it spits out the dog skull.
Oh yeah.
So unsettling, man. And it's like, it's a testament that this film was made in 1981. We're sitting here in 2023, and these effects couldn't be more impactful. My wife, who has never seen this movie, it's one of those things where she was watching this with me, just kind of passively watching. When the dog scene started happening, she was just sitting there with a look on her face of just like, what the fuck is going on? And that's when I think the interest started to build, and she kind of fell into it. When it got to its slower parts, she was kind of in and out. But it's one of those things where she just passively watched in the background. And when the effects scenes came up, it was pretty fucking crazy.
Yeah, and see, and that's where it's like, I think the storytelling here is great. The tension that they build is phenomenal, but it's like getting to the showcase of the effects is really the selling point here. So it's like it facilitates the story so much. Of we have the dog scene, then we have the Nora scene, then we have the blood test scene, and then by the end of it, we have the all out effects show there, and it's just like getting to these big centerpieces throughout this film is why this film is so iconic here because. Like you said, even looking at this film in 2023, they're so iconic. You have to rack your brain to understand exactly how these were built and how well they hold up today.
Yeah. And I think that these films will probably continue to go. I mean, these effects will probably continue to go on well into the next couple of decades, just as
Absolutely.
some of the most iconic effects in all of cinema. I think right up there with things like the stuff they were able to do on like Jurassic Park and things like that. I think like this is still always going to be looked at as some of the best practical effects in cinema. And it's amazing that not only does this film get to have that with this, because it's one of those things where it's like sometimes you have films come out and people glorify the effects or just like the kind of stuff they were able to do over when the story is just kind of middling.
Yeah.
But no, you get an excellent story, great characters, great cast, and you get these A+ special effects on top of it. It's a
Yes.
perfect package. I mean, like, that's why I sit here and say this is my favorite, because it's like I can't think of a flaw in this.
Yeah, and that's where it's like sometimes you can love the effects of a film and then pick out one that's not so great. But here, I mean, these are all A+. It's like
Yeah.
centerpiece after centerpiece after centerpiece. Even that ending where it's like we have the big teeth and the monstrosity that was able to be built there. It's like always this looming terror, and they sell it so well with the wetness of the goo, and just like even when Norris pops open, I think when his head pops off, I think the inside, like the entrails are like yellow and green
Mhm.
and blue, and it's like even that has an otherworldly effect to it. And then there's just something so unsettling as something grows legs, almost spider legs. It's just what a great handle. And when you're building something from nothing and you're just letting your brain go, it's just wild to think of this is a product we got.
Absolutely. But yeah, so I think that about wraps us up here. We gushed about the effects. I don't want to keep us going too long over the 2-hour mark, so we'll move into our last segment, which we used to call The Check is in the Mail. Obviously, reference to Big Trouble in Little China with the wonderful Kurt Russell as well. But now this segment will be known as It's Only a Movie.
action to play this theater. This picture, truly one of the most unusual ever filmed, contains scenes which under no circumstances should be viewed by anyone with a heart condition or anyone who is easily upset.
To avoid fainting, keep repeating. It's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie.
Yes. So this is our legacy section, our wrap up, where we kind of just sit back, think about everything we've discussed today, and just kind of decide, where this film sits as far as today, where it's going to sit in 10 years, where it'll sit in 100 years. And, we just kind of really give our final thoughts here. And Luke, I'm going to let you start us off here just because I might have a lot to say. So.
For me, like this one here, this is going to be ingrained in pop culture for, decades upon decades. I think for me, I look at John Carpenter's The Thing, and when we talk about, Universal monsters from the 1930s, things like that, that are here to stay. They've lasted through time. I think John Carpenter's The Thing is a film that's going to last through time. I think, even 50 years down the line, people are going to look back at this film to say, at the time there, look at these effects. And there's nothing like those practical effects, and just the contained story that we have here, the unique stamp that's put on it. And again, this being a remake and taking this from the source material and making it your own thing. I think this is perfection in terms of those effects, how to do a unique story, and just to kind of have a long-lasting film here. So for me, this film is going to be talked about for decades upon decades.
Yeah, I mean, this is my favorite horror film. I've said it 100 times this podcast. And I think, we've got a lot of reasons on why. But truly, I think at the heart of this, it comes down to the fact that this is just a wonderful story. It's a gruesome, horrific film, but really at the end of the day, this does a lot of things. It plays on your fears. It plays on paranoia. It has a unique setting. It tells a story in which you can't trust anybody, and even on repeat viewings, you can't figure everything out. And I think that that's rare, especially in the day and age where we're at, where, everybody's got a video essay about everything. And, it's one of those things where people can speculate, people can give you their best, guess, but at the end of the day, you can always interpret it another way.
Yeah.
And I think that the true brilliance of this movie is just how it plays with your thoughts. It always gives you something to chew on, always something to think about. And I think that's going to continue. I mean, it's been my favorite, officially my favorite film now for, I want to say almost 10 years. And it is still to this day one of those ones that every time I throw it on, I get something more out of it. And, that is something that I say about certain films we have talked about, but I truly, truly mean it with this, as to where I've seen this movie so many times. And every time I throw it on, I feel like a kid in a candy store. I feel like this is something that, is very special and very tailor-made for me. It also, in a sense, has a lot to do with some of my favorite recent additions into, the subgenre of cosmic horror. We didn't even get to really touch on that much, but this is kind of the template that a lot of people use for people who've made things like The Void or Color Out of Space and things like that, where it's like they always reference The Thing.
And that's where this film is so ingrained into the idea of pop culture. And it's not very often that you get a film that can be almost applied throughout time to those social settings, as we had brought up, COVID and everything. And, the idea of the paranoia and distrust that the Thing displays here is just such a relatable element of the human condition, I feel, where it's like, we become distrustful when we don't have all the information, or when we're told that we need to suspect something, we get really defensive. And I think that's a showcase here in John Carpenter's The Thing, because he's really playing on that human element and that the paranoia that we can easily get. And I think that's one of the reasons that this is going to stick around. Sure, visually this is stunning, but I think at the core of the story here, it's going to be relatable for human beings for forever, with that distrust element there. So it's like looking at this, and we talk about spinning something new. I think John Carpenter and company really had a fun story to tell and a terrifying story to tell, and that's why it's going to just live in horror infamy for the rest of time.
I agree. Alrighty. Well, I think we've done it. I think we can say that we have covered The Thing. Again, technically, because, like we said, I think we brought this up, is, this was technically the first episode, the lost episode of SplatterCast, which I think is on a hard drive I have somewhere. So if I ever do find it, I may upload it just for shits and gigs, just to
there we go. Why not?
See where it all started. And, I said that I saved something that I thought was an interesting piece here. There's, like I said, so much that we could have talked about. But this was kind of interesting to me. And just one of those things where I'm just like, I think that this shows, again, the impact that this film has on pop culture and just life in general. But in August 2003, a couple of hardcore fans, Todd Cameron and Steve Crawford, ventured to the remote filming location in Stewart, British Columbia. After 21 years, they found remains of Outpost 31 and the Norwegian helicopter, the rotor blade, and the chopper now belong to Todd and rests in his collection of memorabilia from the film. So these guys went to the filming location 21 years after it was made and found pieces of the helicopter.
Isn't it wild to think that that was a thing? It's like you could just go out there and they had left some things from the actual film, and it's like, who knew? I think that kind of shows who knew that this film was going to be as prevalent as it still is today. At the time, it's just like, oh, we're just making a film, and then you get the super fans that want to go out to that location. You actually find stuff. Like, I could not imagine having to find memorabilia of the actual film itself would just be so gratifying.
Yeah, and I mean, it does go to show that this film really did find its audience years after. It was so ahead of its time. I mean, even to the box office. I mean, we didn't even really touch on that. But it is one of those things where this film was a financial flop. And it's at the end of its run, it made $19.6 million on a $15 million budget, which, it made its money back, but it didn't make enough to be considered,
Success.
A success. Yeah, it just barely squeaked by. And, that's one of those things that just is mind-boggling to me. A lot of people say that it could be to a few things. A lot of people point to the nihilism of the film and just how dark it is, which is, again, hailed nowadays of just how grim and how interesting that is. But I mean, it came out the same year as E.T., which a lot of people say that the nice alien kind of pushed the evil alien out of there.
And I mean, that would reach as a more general audience than The Thing would.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also something to mention that this did come out the same day as Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. They were released on the same day. And that was also a film that found its audience much later in life.
Yeah.
So something about 1981, man. These classic films that we know and love today were not as loved back then. And I think it's a shame. But also, I think that it's nice to be able to sit here in 2023 and mention this film. And you're right. Like, it's so hard to find anybody who doesn't appreciate it or love it.
Yeah. Could you imagine going to the theater that day and having to do a double feature of John Carpenter's The Thing and Ridley Scott's Blade Runner? Like,
yeah, just not knowing the impact that it's going to have all these years later.
I mean, what a science fiction treat.
Seriously. I mean, like 30 years later, it's just like, wow, these are some of the most iconic films there are. And then Blade Runner has a sequel, years later, that is also just fantastic. And again, we mentioned it. The Thing has a prequel, which is great, but due to studio meddling, I think got quite enraptured in a bunch of stuff. But I
Yes.
think that more people are starting to discover it. I think that it's getting a second life here, and I think within the next 10 years, you're going to hear a lot more positivity about that movie, which is kind of hilarious, considering it's kind of on the same wavelength of The Thing here.
Especially with, kind of undiscovering that lore of what had happened there and what the original intention was and what the actual final product was and the kind of initial love that was behind that film and how it kind of got stomped out a little bit. Yeah, like I revisited that prequel prior to this episode here, and it's one of those ones where it's by no means like the best film out there, but you could tell that they put work into it, and they really wanted to do something different. And knowing what is behind some of that CGI is so intriguing.
I know, and we didn't even touch on it, but I know you kind of were doing some deep research when we were working on our own Thing project. About the 2000, was it 2005 or
2005 science sci-fi channel. It was going to be a 2-day event, and produced by, and they were looking at Frank Darabont, and
God damn, dude, Frank Darabont doing that'd be fucking great.
And I encourage anyone to go out there. The screenplays, both of them are out there to be read at your leisure. I would recommend anyone reading there. It adds a little bit extra to the Thing lore. And it deals with a small town setting. It's in New Mexico, Christmas, New Mexico. And they kind of, have a long list of characters, and they really open that kind of lore up a little bit. It's a lot of fun. If you want to live in the space a little bit longer, I say, nothing's going to be lost going into actually read those and realize what could have been if those had actually went through. But again, with a lot of the Thing stuff, it wasn't meant to be, and it just lives out there on the internet now. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I recommend it. A lot of interesting characters in there, a lot of interesting takes.
100%. And it is one of those things where it's like I would love to see that. I mean, it's a little bit of a bias because the project that we're working on, as far as it being Thing related, I think that is the most natural step for doing a sequel. I know a lot of people are like, oh, we got to bring back McCready and Childs and pick up right after that. It's like, no, I don't think I think we're way too late for that. They have comic books, they have games and things like that deal with it. But I personally think that's where you take the story of Who Goes There.
Yeah.
Take this and give it a town, give it population, see what kind of havoc this thing can wreak when it has access to so many bodies.
Yes.
It's like it'd just be so interesting to see what it does.
Especially again, living in a COVID world, I think people resonate with it even harder nowadays than they would have even in 2005.
I agree 100%. I think we're going to have to do a little video here, Luke. I think we're going to have to maybe do something, call it More Things. And, we'll talk about kind of these unproduced ideas and scripts and go a little deeper into that. I think that might be something we have to do on the channel at some point.
Hey, I'm for
because there's all kinds of stories with this stuff, like
there's
different routes and, what could have been and what almost
there's a video
was.
game.
Yeah, the video game, which is very good, apparently. I never got to play it, but a lot of people speak very highly of it. So, alrighty, guys. Well, that wraps us up here. I think that's everything about the Thing. So, thanks for sitting with us and talking and getting to hear all these interesting stories. Some you probably heard before, maybe a couple you haven't, but yeah, I mean, I absolutely check this film out if you haven't. But if you have, watch it again. And enjoy it. It's that time of year, at least for us in Northeast Ohio here, where it gets pretty cold out.
Yeah,
we're going to be in our own frozen hell here pretty soon. So it's one of those things where it's like, when the snow is deep, this is one of the best films to throw on. And yeah, that's all I got.
It was a great January watch.
It was a great. That's again, Not only is it my birth month, but it is one of those things where it's like perfect film for January. But that kicks us off for 2023 on the actual podcast version of this itself. Next month is a Luke pick. So, obviously we're not going to say what it is, but it is pretty exciting. We got some things.
Very fun sequel.
Yes, we can mention that. If he wants to mention that, we'll say it's a sequel. But yeah, and it is one of those things where it's like we are cooking things up for that. There's potential for there to be some big stuff on the horizon with that to coincide, but we'll have to wait and see. But it's going to be a lot of fun. It is something I've never seen, so this will be my first time viewing it, which I'm very excited. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Other than that, we got a lot of great stuff on the channel right now. We got the review of Skinamarink is up. We also just did a Friday the 13th video for last Friday, which was pretty cool, as well as the Sunday Scaries. So, keep your eye out for that. And we have a lot of great stuff coming down the pipeline for you guys. So keep your eyes posted on the channel. Everything is to be continued. And let us know how you feel about the new intros and the new cards and everything. You like what we're doing with them. Again, we kind of had to diversify here, so hopefully we don't get flagged, but I think we'll be all right.
I think so. Fingers crossed, anyway.
Absolutely. But yeah, so I guess that about wraps us up. So until next time, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.